Hello there, I'm Customising and we're back in the box. The actual effect as applied here is not necessarily at the quality of what I would apply when I'm actually working on a mix. I'm really more concerned with passing along the fundamentals and not so much trying to be exact with the best of reverb. So I don't want you all going up in arms that is not the best reverb or anything. Look more to first to get the fundamentals, basically the procedural fundamentals of how you set it up and why you're doing it. And you can deal with the fancy flamboyant things later. I'm gonna go ahead and create another space. So here, once I've clicked onto bus 2, you see that a new channel was created for us here. And on that, I'm going to apply a new reverb. I'm going to go for this other plugin, Reverb. You'll find that we have many of the same controls here. We have pre-delay, just as we did there. And we've got an attack here, which kind of operates on the pre-delay. It kind of allows us that if it's closer this side, it's kind of, you'll have a more immediacy of the sound of the fast reflections. So you can see that if it's this side, it's really, it has that immediacy, and when the other side, it gets a little bit even honky because there are several reflections like bumping into each other and accentuating certain frequencies. That's the attack. Then you have size. We already dealt with that. It's like the size of the room. Density, similar to how that density is, dealing with like the diffusion. Like, so the higher it is, the more complex the diffused sound is, the more scattered the sound is, and this way less so. And then we've got decay. Like I said, in this particular plugin, there were several things compounded within the density element. So you see here, density and decay are separated, whereas in here, you kind of had decay happening both in reflectivity and in density. So here you get like it's distinctly separated, but these two are very related. And then you have the distance, like, which is kind of like how far, again, gives you an idea of the space that you're in. All these are not that different from what we had here. It's just that they're splitting the controls a little bit more, giving you more punch for your buck. Then you got here this element of freeze. I don't find much use for it, but you can basically hold a note. So if it's it has been playing like so. Once you click it, it can like hold the reverb. Of course, you can, through like automation, you can do things with that can be interesting, or perhaps not. And then we've got a dry and wet as usual to balance between the dry signal coming in and the wet. And this would only apply when we have applied the reverb as an insert. Then we have a more elaborate EQ here. That has, or at least filtering EQ, that allows us to take certain things out, notch elements that we don't like out, do a low cut or high cut and stuff like that to shape the nature of our reverb, and in so doing, shaping our room. But further on, there's another thing here, like if you click the details, you get a more elaborate EQ that allows you to do many more things, a much more detailed control of your reverb. And so I find that this is a very cool plugin to actually design your own spaces and reverb textures, character, and you can do it in such a way that even you can start to change the timbre of an instrument if you wanted to do such a thing because of these two elaborate EQs within. When you go to details, you'll find more parameters here. Below here, we've got quality, and it does exactly what it means. So you get a slightly lo-fi feeling with this, and then it gets more pristine as you go above. Then you got a modulation section, similar to the one we had here, which I switched off. This one is a little bit more workable, more realistic than the one that is in the other plugin. So I'm more likely to use this, but the chances I'll probably not touch it. but it's referring to the kind of effect that comes from when sounds are reflecting and the reflections bounce into each other and then they go along with each other and all those kinds of things, and they sometimes create some chorusing elements, but they're usually hardly discernible, so it should be used very sparingly. Then you can change the kind of wave. Now remember, this will already be determined by the sound character that is coming into the reverb, but you can further affect it and change, or at least affect the character or timbre of the instrument. And then you have like a smoothing, and this is dealing with the diffusion. So the smoother it is, basically the more diffusion, and in a sense that means there are more reflections in the space. Either the space is big or there are many surfaces bouncing sounds all over, or if it's the other way, then that means there are less surfaces from which sound is bouncing, not much sound is scattered. And then you also have the early and late reflections balancing, where if it's this side, you got more of the early reflections that take precedence, so it sounds like much of a smaller room. And then the other end, you got the later reflections, basically the decay of the reverb is taking precedence, and in a sense it's a bigger room. Not only a bigger room, but it also means that the person listening is far from the original source of the sound. You can use this to balance between early reflections and the decaying reflections. And then width says exactly what it says. So this side is a smaller room, a smaller space, then it's bigger or wider the other end. This monomaker does exactly what it said, and it does it on the basis of the frequency that you've chosen here. So there are several parameters here that you can fiddle with and kind of shape your reverb to suit your needs. And of course you can save whatever results, just like I did mine, and have your own presets. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using these many presets. There are many wonderful presets here, and a lot of them are workable. But many times, depending on the music you're making, it's hard for a preset to just come in and fit into the music. So it's worthwhile taking the time to kind of like, yes, you get something that is close to what you need, and then you start to structure it to fit more the music that you're working on and the kind of production you're trying to make, rather than just chuck stuff on and use them willy-nilly without really putting any effort into making something unique. And in here, again, I already created something I like. I always like create these spaces that I like. There's a church in Kisugu. This is in Uganda, of course, in Kampala. And I like the sound or the memory of that sound. And so what I've done here is to try and recreate that space. Of course, now because I've applied it as a parallel effect, then I don't need the dry, because the dry will exist on its own, the original, and then the effect can come in 100%. You can see the different bands. It gives us an opportunity to actually shape the sound of the reverb so that we don't get in the way of the original sound. Or maybe we even want to get in the way of the original sound. So I'm going to play around with it as I play back, and then you can hear what it's doing. So this is only applied to the vocal at the moment. So you can see there that even by just shaping the EQ on this plugin, on this reverb, the nature and flavor and even the amount of reverb, or the perception of the amount of reverb, changes. Because remember, if a room has like corners, it will be a little bit more boomy, so it will have a different kind of reverb because the corners are creating all this boomy sound. So you may find that if you want that character, then maybe you would still raise this up or keep it up so that you have that kind of space. And sometimes bigger rooms also can accentuate some of those low end elements. I'll just play and using one more here, which I'm going to apply to several. This is called Kansanga Yard. And again, this is from my childhood. There's an area in which we used to hang out. It's like part of the home, but there's a yard which was like concrete, and it's an enclosure, but there's no roof to it. But all around their walls, it had a very specific character, especially when a dog was barking. When my dog would bark in that space, there's a way the sound sounded cool. And I kind of like that thing when it's applied to percussion. So I'm going to show that applied to actually both the percussion and the voice. So we're going to go here and go to aux 2. Actually, I should have named it Reverb 2. Trying to be systematic here. So anyway, we're going to send a little bit of that, and let me play. So you hear that sound where things sound like they're really, like the walls are close by, but there's also a certain openness to the sound. So there is reverb, but it has an immediacy to it. Apply a little bit of it to the akogo. Yeah, I was trying to refine it there. It's no longer relevant to have this reverb like panned. But with the new reverb, I'm going to pan a little bit that end and get this drum. I'm going to pan a little bit that end. So let me play it out, and I think we've got an idea how that works. Before we go out, I want to leave you a little tip. You see just above here, there's this button that says sends on fader. It basically makes all these nodes or knobs, virtual knobs. It turns them into faders instead, whereby you have an easier control like a fader, as opposed to this little dial. I find it very finicky because it's very tiny. So if you're using a mouse, it's like really, So just imagine if there are many tracks and you have to go twiddling with each one, and yet even on one single track, you might have like several buses. It can get really tedious. So if you click this button, then all the faders that are relating to the actual tracks are gone. And then what you're left with are the ones which are relating to the bus in question. So just like as you see there, bus 1. So you see, and you can see it moving up and down. So now they're taking over the job of that. And these are easier to move than these other little dials. One thing to pay attention to is that the name you see there is the name of what bus you're busy controlling. So that's why it's all important to be naming these things. So we have reverb there, and then your name shows up there. So if we switch to reverb 2, then it will show us the other dials. So even this one shows because it is being sent to bus 2, which has reverb 2. So I think you get the idea. And also these ones are being sent there as well. And you see that the others are deactivated. So it's a very useful and handy feature. In the next one, we'll actually look at darking the reverb, whereby you can kind of squash it sometimes. they come, they come.